Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lock-Cast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on social media at MMALOTN. I wanted to say that this was the final episode of the MMA Lock-Cast for 2022, but I would be lying, because there is actually another event that I'll be covering for you folks, and it's going to be the Bellator versus Rizin card, which goes down on New Year's Eve, and I believe there is only 5 fights on that card. I know Rizin has a card before that as well, but I won't be covering that. I'll only be covering the one with the Bellator fighters in it as well, so you guys can expect a breakdown of all 5 of those fights. I believe it's only 5 fights during that last week of December, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But in terms of the UFC schedule, this is the last event of the year, and they ended off with a solid fight night card, if I'm being honest. You got the middleweights in the main event between Sean Strickland and Jared Cannonier. Great fight there between two guys that were, just off of a title shot or a number one contenders fight. Should be interesting to see who is able to reassert themselves into that top 3 discussion of the middleweights. Very interested for that matchup. But the fight that I really believe deserved the main event slot in this and has the most ramifications based on their division is Damir Ismagulov versus Arman Tsarukyan. That is a phenomenal fight. I can't wait for that one. I've had my eye on both these guys since they entered the UFC, and I think they have, win, lose, or draw this weekend. They both have very high ceilings and a potential to be fighting for the title in the next 2 to 3 years. But can't wait to break down that one for you. Not to mention a bunch of other great fun fights sprinkled out throughout the card. I got you covered with a breakdown for every single fight. Before we get into that, though, let's go over our betting recap from this past weekend. And it seems like I'm going to have to say past weekend now rather than just the past event, considering your boy is starting to cover the regional MMA scene as well, which not a bad start, I must say. But we'll start off with the Bellator card that went down on Friday. We end up with the small profit there, but we'll go over the losses first. First of which was the under 2.5 in the Denise Kielholz and Elada Joanny fight at 1.15 units at -115 there. I underestimated the chin on Joanny as she ate almost everything that Denise Kielholz threw at her, and she didn't even flinch. I thought if Kielholz would be able to land those strikes, which she did, I thought she'd be able to ground Joanny and finish her from there. But Joanny showed the toughness, showed the durability, and eventually was able to get her hand raised via decision. We lose that bet on the night. Main event, I had 1 unit on Danny Sabatello at +140. Questionable scoring in that fight. I thought we had a fighting chance with that +140 on Sabatello based on his grappling and his relentlessness, but it was Rafion Stotts, I would say. I shouldn't make him Brazilian, but it was Rafion Stotts who went out there and laid down the more effective damage, really ticked off that scoring criteria, number 1, which is damage, and I believe he did enough there. So shout out to anybody that cashed in on Stotts. I thought I got some decent enough value on the Sabatello side, just couldn't cross the finish line there. But I had 3 other hits on the card. The over 2.5 in the Cass and Jared Scoggins fight, -165 to win 1 unit. Happy to cash that one, especially with Scoggins, the big favorite in that matchup, shit in the bed. I won't lie, I did have a couple of degenerate parlays tied to Jared Scoggins, and I was very surprised that he wasn't able to assert his grappling dominance as he normally has. But if people were reading the Best Bets and Props article that I did drop, my one concern for that matchup was Scoggins fighting at this weight class. Cassbell was clearly bigger than him, and it seemed to take a toll on Scoggins anytime they got into the grappling positions. Shout out to Cassbell for pulling off the upset there. I had a +1.15 unit cash on Michael Lombardo, who I felt like I should have gone deeper on, given the advantages he had in that fight, especially in the grappling, the defensive grappling, which obviously held up for him, but also his striking. He had big power in his hands. I knew he'd knock out Lemminger if he would be able to keep this fight standing, which he did. Good cash for us there. Good underdog to cash as well. Not to mention another underdog that was on the other Bellator Bantamweight Grand Prix fight of the night. I believe that was the semifinals. Patchy Mix comes through for a 1.15 unit profit. That man is nasty with his jiu-jitsu, and if he can get your neck, whether it's a rear naked choke or a guillotine, he will put you to sleep, and that's exactly what he did against Magomedov. Not to mention, he looked very good in the early going of that fight. He was stuffing the takedowns. He was touching up Magomedov from the outside, but it ultimately came down to that guillotine choke he was able to secure, taking home that neck with him and stamping his spot in the finals to take on Rafion Stotts to culminate the Bantamweight Grand Prix. Can't wait to see that fight. And looking forward to seeing the line that we could potentially get on Patchy Mix again, because I really think that guy is one of the best, if not the best 135er in Bellator at this present time. All right, later that night, we had LFA 148 as well, and I had 4 bets on that card. We'll quickly go over that. I had a 3-leg parlay, which I'm not used to doing, but considering the level of discrepancy in skills in these particular matchups, I had to take the shot. So first of which, this is the one fight I did not get to see because I'm not sure where the prelims were posted, but Eduardo Pena easily defeating Joseph Dorado via decision. I thought it would come via quick stoppage given how good his jiu-jitsu is and how sloppy Dorado has been in past fights, but goes out there, gets a decision win. I'm happy with the dub regardless. Minus 600 on Cody Davis to go out there and put away his opponent, Alvaro Prado. No brainer. You know what I mean? I was considering the under 2.5 in that fight as well because I thought his grappling would be way better than Prado and he'd be able to get him out of there. I didn't get to the betting window with it, but I was sure to stay away from that over 2.5 prop. And then lastly, Dione Barbosa winning over Mariana Piccolo, minus 270 on her. That was an easy parlay to put together, and I wish I went deeper than just 1 unit, but we cashed 1.06 units on that parlay. 2 losses on the night was 1 unit at plus 185 on James Wilson against Richie Miranda. That was close. I believe it was a split decision, if I'm not mistaken, but James Wilson going out there and giving us all we could handle for a plus 185 underdog. Didn't get to cross the line there, but happy with his performance and happy with my ability to call those fights that will likely be closer than the odds suggest. I also called it for the Ernesto Rodriguez fight that happened earlier in the night against Jeff Craig, I believe the kid's name was, but I didn't get to the window as I just needed to see a little bit more from Rodriguez, but luckily, hopefully, I managed to steer some people away from the Jeff Craig side so that they didn't have to rip up any parlay tickets there. Also, 1.1 unit loss on Danny Silva against Kanan Kawahai. The reason, and I put this in my best bets and prop circle, Danny Silva likely would have been a 3 to 4 unit play had I had more legit data on what his defensive grappling looked like. The only fight that I saw his grappling fully in use was an earlier amateur fight that he had, and it looked great. But that was against a different level of competition. Now up against, decent regional guys, we have to see what he brings to the table. And he just could not stop the takedowns of Kanan when it mattered. And I fully expected Kanan to slow down, which he did. But I thought it would be to the point that he would not be able to secure takedowns and Danny Silva would possibly knock him out in that last round. But he could not stop the takedowns. He couldn't effectively get back to his feet so that he can throw his strikes. We rope up that ticket at minus 110, minus 1.1 unit there. But luckily, in the main event of the night, your boy cashes on a plus 375 underdog in Chris Brown. Ridiculous that the line got this wide, in my opinion. Chris Brown opened up as a small favorite. A ton of money coming in on the Alfonso Leyva side. And yes, the guy looked like a fun prospect. Good or a big power, a little bit more technical striking than you would expect from a guy coming from a wrestling background. But the fact of the matter is he was beating up on tomato cans the entire time, and we never really saw him against a legitimate opponent. People wanted to point to his last opponent that he fought on the LFA scene as a legit enough opponent, but that dude was an 8-1 roid monkey that was off of MMA competition for nearly 3 years before coming back, picking up a win, and then fighting Alfonso Leyva, and we saw him gas about 3 to 4 minutes into that fight. Chris Brown put on a spectacular striking performance that night and just ultimately ate up the body of Leyva, got him out of there, cashes our plus 375 ticket. Wish I went 1 unit, only went half unit, still cash for 1.87 unit to cash us 0.83 units on LFA. So for Friday night, just under a 2 unit profit between Bellator and LFA. Happy to get that cash. But got some decent cash at UFC 282, which was on Saturday night. We'll start off with the props here. 1.25 unit at minus 125 on Edmund Shabazi inside the distance. Started off closer than I thought, and as this fight started to drag deeper into round 2, I thought I was going to be forced to rip up that ticket. Luckily, Shabazi lands a big punch, follows up with some big strikes, and gets Dalcha out of there. We cashed that for 1 unit. Billy Quarantillo, always going through hell and brimstone to get his wins. It looked shady in that first round, but but luckily for him in that second round, his cardio advantage and Alexander Hernandez starting to slow down very much benefited him. He was able to get him out of there in that second round. I was hoping this was going to get pushed to that third, but happy to cash that ticket on Quarantillo inside the distance at plus 155. So easy and, well, not easy, but a predictable win there for Billy Quarantillo, the way that he was able to get it. We did start off the night with a small minus 0.31 unit loss on Steven Kozlow at plus 325. That guy fought for your dollar at plus 325, got us the positions that we needed. I'm thinking maybe if he had a full training camp and was fully prepared for this matchup, maybe we would get a better showing from him and possibly even be able to cash that ticket. You guys know I'm big on Cameron Simon and cashed him as a plus 200 underdog on the Contender Series, but I felt the odds were way off here, and I think it was, you could see why once that fight was really starting to get going, but it was ultimately the cardio issues and the short notice nature of this fight causing Kozlow to slow down, eventually Simon getting him out of there in that third round. So minus 0.31 unit there. We had Ilya Topuria come through for 1 unit, absolutely destroying Bryce Mitchell and showcasing that if you can keep fights upright, you will more than likely have an advantage over Bryce Mitchell as long as you don't show him too much respect with his wrestling. Topuria going out there doing the damn thing. Beautiful win for him. I'm very happy that he was able to get the finish too. 2 units on Santiago Ponzinibbio at minus 180 seemed to be a bad bet until Ponzinibbio puts all that big power against Alex Morono late in that fight, getting that knockout with 1 second left in the under 2.5 for anybody that had money on that. Morono showed up that night, and even though he had an abbreviated training camp for that fight, he was putting the pressure on and showing us vintage Alex Morono shit. But Ponzinibbio, a little bit too vet savvy to eventually, to fade away in that fight. He stayed in that the entire time, eventually getting that third round knockout, and we get to cash our ticket for 1.11 units. And then the co-main event started, guys. This is where everything was looking great up until the decision was read. We had 1 unit on Jared Gordon at plus 217. I thought he did enough to win the first round. I thought he did enough to win the third round. Unfortunately, 2 judges gave Paddy Pimblett the first round. Makes no sense to me, as that's the round that Jared Gordon did the most damage on Pimblett. And then 2 judges gave Gordon round 3. And that round, he was pretty much just controlling him the entire time. So egregious, horrible decision in my opinion. Very pissed off about that, as that would have cashed a plethora of degenerate tickets that I had as well riding on that fight. Anywhere between $10,000 to $15,000 extra would have been in my pocket had Jared Gordon gotten his hand raised via decision that night, but it was not meant to be. And I was even thinking before that decision was read, I'm like, if I'm ever to get fucked on a decision, this would be the fight, considering the hype train around Paddy Pimblett, and that's exactly what ended up happening that night. Then we move on to the main event, and I gotta say I was a little bit bitter considering how Ankalaev was not showcasing his wrestling early in that fight, and he ended up paying for it. Managed to get it going in the 4th round, dominant 5th round, ends up going to a draw, and a lot of people thought that Ankalaev deserved that decision, myself included on first watch. But after reviewing the tape, that first round was a complete toss-up. You can't be mad at scoring that round for either guy, which makes me believe the draw was probably the best call at the end of the day. Round 2, Blachowicz. Round 3, Blachowicz. Round 4, Ankalaev. Round 5, Ankalaev 10-8, considering he got all but 10 seconds of control time in that 5th round, controlled him for 4 minutes and 50 seconds, and beat the shit out of him the entire way. Only 2 judges gave him a 10-8. The one judge that scored that fight for Blachowicz did not score that at 10-8 for Ankalaev. If he did, that also would have been a draw scorecard as well. So draw at the end of the day. Not a bad spot. Lock of the night play there doesn't come through, but luckily we don't have to rip up the ticket. It's just a push. We get the 5 units back. So all in all, plus 3.35 units on the night for a 28% ROI. Not to mention on the entire weekend, I believe it was over 5 units of profit, close to 6 units of profit. Happy with that showing, especially with the debacle that UFC Orlando was the prior week, my worst event of the year. Happy to gain some momentum back here by cashing on these 3 events. Hopefully, we can cash on the upcoming 3 events as well this weekend. We got UFC Vegas 66, like I've said, CFFC, I believe that goes down Friday, and then Fury FC, which goes down Sunday. I'll likely have bets on all 3 of those. Breakdowns, full breakdowns for those regional shows will only be on the Patreon. Link in the description below. Check that out. and also actually bets for the UFC, now that I'm on a 3-event winning streak or longer, those will also be behind the Patreon paywall, but I'll be sure to drop the dog of the night play for you guys for free the day before the fights. But if you want access to the picks, hit up the Patreon. $5 a month for UFC, UFC, Bellator, and Contender Series. $15 a month for CFFC, Fury FC, LFA, Cage Warriors, and PFL whenever they return. Ton of bang for your buck. There are a ton of work going into it as well. Appreciate the near 350 members that we currently have over there. Hopefully we can end this year off strong with some dubs over there. All right. Let's not waste any more time. We got a ton of fights to get through for this UFC Vegas 66 card. Let's kick it off with Sergey Morozov, who comes in as a minus 280 favorite. He's going up against Newson, who comes in at plus 235. Now, with Sergey Morozov, this is a guy that I used to be very high on coming into the UFC. Even though he dropped his first fight to Umar Nurmagomedov, a lot of people were seeming to sell on him immediately. Not me. I saw him as an underdog against Khalid Taha in his second UFC fight, and I let it go. I pushed the button on that, pulled the trigger on that, and was happy to do so considering how lopsided that fight ended up being. He managed to fumble the bag against Douglas Silva de Andrade because he fell too much in love with his hands in that fight. And even though he rocked, dropped, and almost finished Douglas in that first round, he paid for it in the second round by not going to his grappling, eventually getting knocked out himself. Not a good look. But he bounces back with the win over Raulian Paiva, which did not come without adversity either. In that first round, he got rocked and hurt pretty badly by Paiva. That's when the light bulb went on in his head, and he was able to go into that second and third rounds, utilize his wrestling a little bit more effectively, and he was able to get his hand raised via decision. Newson, on the other hand, big win in his last fight against Fernie Garcia, where he came in as an underdog. If anybody was following your boy, we cashed on that ticket as well. But Journey's still a little bit of an unknown in how high his ceiling can actually be. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and his striking looked decent enough against Fernie, who seemed to have going into that fight, seemed to have the striking advantage, but didn't work out for him there, as Newson stayed busy enough with his punches, with his strikes, and his movement that it caused disruption in the flow of Fernie Garcia's game, allowing Newson to outpoint him and win that fight via decision. He will likely have, the striking is going to be relatively the same here. I think it'll be nullified. And then I think it's going to come down to the grappling game of Morozov, and he will face some adversity with Journey Newson throwing up submissions and remaining active off of his back. But I think that we'll see Morozov deal with that pretty well, grind this fight out. I think we see it go over the 2.5 mark, which is currently sitting at minus 165. But I don't want to tie myself to that minus 280 on Morozov here. I think he still has a lot more to show us. I think we need to see him fully gain his confidence back before we can bet him at chalk once again. And Journey Newson, a guy that's relatively been overlooked by the betting public, I think he doesn't get enough respect. And, even though I don't see value on him this weekend, I do think he is a threat to go out there and pull off an upset. But my official prediction is going to be Morozov by decision. But if I was to make a bet on this fight, likely would be the over 2.5 at minus 165. All right. Let's move along to the next fight here, which takes us to the flyweight division. And we got Kape coming in as a minus 240 favorite. He's going up against David Dvorak, who's at plus 200. Now, this is one of the fights, and there's going to be many fights on this card where you'll hear me talk about recency bias and market overcorrection. And I think that's what we're getting here with the David Dvorak side. Last time around, he lost to Matthias Nicolau in a somewhat close fight early, and then eventually Nicolau will start to hurt him and pull away with that fight in the second and third rounds. But Dvorak was in that the entire time. Even in the third round, after getting hurt numerous times, he's landing takedowns and still coming forward and trying to get the dub. And he was a minus 125 favorite going into that fight. Now he loses to one of the top flyweights in the world, and you guys put him down at plus 200? I get it. From the outside looking in, okay, this guy got hurt a couple of times by Nicolau. Now you got Kape, who's a big puncher and a big knockout artist in his own right, especially at flyweight. Of course, that's making him a minus 240 favorite. It doesn't make sense to me because there have been fights where Kape has had to go the full 15 minutes. He fights very close to the level of his competition. And even in fights where he goes out there and gets the knockout, it's possible that his opponent was winning the fight up until that point. And David Dvorak has all the skills in the world to make this fight competitive. I love his boxing style. He moves forward, throws in combinations, but his leg kicking game is probably the best part of it. Best part of his striking game, I should say. He attacks the calf and the leg effectively and consistently enough that he could possibly take away the explosiveness from Kape in this matchup. He also has the grappling in his back pocket should he look to take this fight to the ground and try to control Kape there, try to make it look good for the judges, land some good shots from on top, and accruing that control time, like I said. Manel Kape, I think he is more so reliant on that finish. So rather than paying that minus 240, I think taking him to win by KO is probably the better way to go about it rather than tying yourself to minus 240. I don't think he's worth the chalk considering how he fights. Yes, people might say he looks minus 240 when he gets the knockout, but minus 240 is a large number to pay, a large amount of chalk to pay on a guy that you're hoping can land that knockout. Whereas David Dvorak has way more paths to victory, in my opinion, from the output to the consistency to the takedowns. This guy's got it. And I think that this is a great spot to go out there and try to cash a plus 200 underdog. So I'm going to be on the David Dvorak side here. I think he puts together a much better body of work than Manel Kape, gets his hand raised via decision, and cashes that plus 200 ticket. All right, let's move on to the next fight here where we got Rinat Fakhretdinov coming in at minus 130 and Bryan Battle coming in at plus 110. Now, Bryan Battle, one of my favorite fighters in the UFC, just given his style and his cardio. He's a great all-around fighter with probably more developing striking, but he does a great job of staying on the outside, picking apart his opponent, making them work, blending in his takedowns behind his striking very well, but his cardio is probably the best part of his game. He's able to wear down opponents and then finish them late or win via decision, similar to what he did to Andre Petroski on The Ultimate Fighter, similar to what he did against Trishan Gore. Even after eating some big shots, was able to stick to the game plan and outplay Trishan Gore en route to a decision victory. Here against Rinat comes in, pretty highly touted, a big prospect, a lot of people think, but I have some question marks about him. There's a reason he's not a minus 300 fighter, considering that he has an Ov in his name. He has some flaws. He has some things that Bryan Battle can likely exploit. Rinat's game is mainly consistent of going for takedowns, dragging his opponents through the mud, and just controlling them in those spots. Not a big puncher. His striking still needs some work, but a lot of his game, just as we saw in the Andreas Michailidis fight, is pushing his opponents up against the cage, going for double legs, transitioning to single legs, chaining his wrestling together, getting these guys to the mat. But I think he's going to struggle to do that against Bryan Battle, who's shown decent enough takedown defense and has shown that he actively works to get back to his feet should he ever get put into bad positions. And then on the feet, I think he is a very good striker, or at least a solid enough striker to stick and move here against Rinat, stuff the takedowns, and force Rinat to work and start to take over the later that this fight goes. I think this is one of those live spots where we can probably target the round 3 prop for Bryan Battle, although I do think this goes the full 15 minutes and he gets his hand raised by being the more damaging fighter, right? Rinat might get some takedowns and some control time, but I think that's going to be limited by the consistent work of Battle to get back to his comfort zone and unleash the damage from distance. And that's where I think he'll get the judges' favor, land the more damage, and ultimately win this fight by decision. So another live underdog early on in this card. I'm going to go with Bryan Battle and Battle by decision. Next up, Maheshate, coming in at plus 110, fresh off that knockout victory over Steve Garcia a couple months back. Rafa Garcia coming in at minus 130 as a slight favorite, as the more tested and experienced UFC veteran who's faced a number of opponents now. I like what we see from Garcia in terms of showcasing a full MMA game. This guy's improving striking, even though a lot of his strikes are just brutish overhands and a lot of big power, but he can get the takedown game going, get the grappling going, clinch these guys up against the cage, drag them to the ground, get some control time from on top, and he's relentless with it. Like, he'll always come forward and crash the pocket, and his durability has looked good enough to this point that it will likely work out for him here against Maheshate as well. Maheshate, I only have about 3 fights of footage on him, and the first fight, you see him just get grounded out and completely grinded for 15 minutes against his opponent that night over in Russia. The next fight, the Contender Series fight, where he's able to keep the fight at distance, pick apart his opponent, and he was a big underdog that night, pulls it off, and to be honest, I didn't think his opponent that night was the greatest, nor deserved to be that big of a favorite, but I wasn't really betting Contender Series back then, so I can't really say much about that if I'm being honest. Then in his last fight, goes out there and just absolutely murks Steve Garcia, knocking him out, and I believe he cashed that night as an underdog too. Now here he is as an underdog once again, but I think the durability of Rafa Garcia is going to keep him safe in this matchup, and I think that we'll see him just stay consistent, stay in the pocket, and stay close with Maheshate in terms of keeping him in the clinch and looking to drag this fight to the ground over and over again so that Maheshate can't be too comfortable just striking from the outside and getting his own game off. I like Garcia in this spot. I'm a little bit questionable about the minus 130 if I'm being honest. I think the over might not be a bad spot, although you might as well back Garcia if you're going to take the over, as the odds are roughly the same. And if Maheshate is going to win, it likely comes inside the distance. I see Garcia via decision hanging around plus 165. I think I'd be a little bit more inclined to take a shot on that, as I'd kind of be surprised if he actually finishes Maheshate. Garcia not known to be much of a finisher, even though he throws nothing but big strikes. But Maheshate, very young kid, working at Killcliff FC as well. Who knows what kind of improvements we're going to see from him going into this matchup. Because if he can stuff a couple of takedowns, if he can hurt Garcia while they're in the clinch, then he has the freedom of fighting at that space that he's so good at, using his length and using his distance striking to get above his opponents. Like he did against Achilles Estra, whatever that kid's name was, on the Contender Series. So, initially, I wanted to take the Garcia side, but I was hoping closer to that pick'em range. I missed out on that line earlier this week, so shout out to anybody that got in on Garcia already. But if this line does start to bounce back, and if we do get that minus 110 on Garcia, that plus 100 on Garcia, I might take a little bit of a shot on him here. I believe in his durability. I believe in his grinding style, and I think that might end up being too much for Maheshate here. So give me Garcia by decision. Next up, great fight here. Probably the fight that I'm looking forward to second most on this card. We got Said Nurmagomedov going up against Said Yokub Kakhramanov, and this fight's a pick'em. Obviously, Nurmagomedov opened up as a slight favorite. Money coming in on Kakhramanov now, making this fight a straight-up pick'em. Now, I am very proud of being able to pick Kakhramanov in his last fight against Ronnie Lawrence, who seemed to be the shit going into that fight. I believe Ronnie Lawrence going into that fight with Kakhramanov, including his Contender Series fight, landed over 25 takedowns in 3 fights. We knew him as that relentless wrestling grinder who's going to always get you to the ground and had the gas tank to do so. But he met his match here against Kakhramanov, where Kakhramanov was the guy that landed 10 plus takedowns that night compared to the one for Ronnie Lawrence. Ronnie Lawrence didn't come from a wrestling background. He just has that pace and that output and that relentlessness that a lot of guys were not able to deal with. But Kakhramanov was the one with the better technical wrestling, and he showcased it that night, and he showed that his cardio was on point as well, grinding out Ronnie Lawrence for that full 15-minute mark. Great performance from him and showcasing what kind of talent this kid could actually be in this 135-pound weight class. Now, Said Nurmagomedov, he is not that Khabib type Nurmagomedov, right? He is more so a Ankalaev type Dagestani, where he likes to go out there and strike. He's a little bit more flashy than Ankalaev. He likes to throw a lot of spinning stuff, a lot of flying stuff, a lot of pot shots from the outside. And he has good enough defensive grappling to deal with some fighters, but I think he's going to meet his match here in Kakhramanov, who likely will be able to deal with the striking game and not give Said that space that he needs to operate with that flashy striking and unorthodox striking game. I think we'll see Yokub. I want to call him Yokub, but that's not his name. It's Said Yokub, but we'll go with Kakhramanov. I think we'll see Kakhramanov similar to Brian Battle, similar to Rafa Garcia from the fight that I talked about prior, not giving Nurmagomedov any space, sticking close to him, pushing him up against the cage, dragging this fight to the ground, and rinse and repeat. He can do that over and over again. We've seen Nurmagomedov taken down by lesser opponents, in my opinion, and I think that Kakhramanov is going to give him a bit of a grappling lesson in this matchup. I am guilty of taking that plus 200 on Cody Stamann when he fought Nurmagomedov a couple fights ago, and that obviously didn't work out to my prediction, but Kakhramanov has the durability. Kakhramanov has gone up against high-level opponents in the past, like Umar Nurmagomedov on the regional scene, and held his own. Similar to what Tsarukyan looked like against Islam Makhachev in his UFC debut. That's the same feeling I got from Kakhramanov watching that fight with Umar Nurmagomedov. Everybody expected Nurmagomedov to just crush him that night, but he stayed in that fight, had his own success, and showcased to me that this guy will likely be a very hot prospect when he starts putting things together, and he's at that stage right now. This would be a big win for him if he can secure it, and I think he does. So give me Kakhramanov by decision. I'm in. All right, next up, we go from a very technical, fun fight to what could be the sloppiest fight of the night, but a very volatile fight as well. We got Julian Marquez coming in as a minus 170 favorite and plus 145 the return on Winn. On paper, everybody fully expects Marquez to go out there and starch Winn, knock him out, finish this fight quickly, right? But we got to give Winn a little bit more respect than that. I get it. His fight with Phil Hawes wasn't the best. But go back and watch that Antonio Hoyo fight. Excuse me. Don't get me wrong. I do think that Julian Marquez is more dangerous than Antonio Hoyo. But you're talking about a Hoyo who's an inch taller and an inch longer than Julian Marquez. And we saw Winn land takedown after takedown and control that fight when he really needed to. Julian Marquez just gave up 5 takedowns to Maki Pitolo, got controlled for a large part of that fight until he was able to pull one out of his ass and win that fight via submission in the dying seconds of that fight. That could absolutely happen here as well, but I don't think you're getting much value by taking Marquez at minus 170. I think the best way to bet him, if you're looking to do so, is on the live line. Because I have no doubt that Winn will likely land some takedowns early in this matchup if he goes for them hard enough. And if he does, then we'll probably get plus money on Marquez going into round 2. But if Maki Pitolo is getting this guy to the ground, Winn is the better wrestler, and although he's not as big as Maki Pitolo, he has shown that he can get these bigger guys to the ground and control them. He could do that here against Marquez. Marquez has heavily relied on his ability to finish opponents to get his hand raised. I could be wrong. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but I believe none of his wins have come via decision. All of his wins by finish. I believe all but 2 of his 12 fights have gone. Let me rephrase this properly. 10 out of his 12 professional MMA fights have finished inside the distance. It doesn't work well for him when these fights go the distance, though, and at least from what I can gather and going into this fight against Winn. So it's so hard for me to make a case for Winn and then actually put my money down on him because of how flimsy and floppy he's been looking over his last couple fights. So I'm going to wait on this fight. I'm thinking we're going to get that blind money coming in on the Marquez side, pushing him to a minus 200, maybe even minus 220 by fight time. So if you give me that plus 180 or plus 200 on Winn, you're forcing my hand to take the bet on him there because we've seen his strength be the weakness of Julian Marquez in the past, and it could come to fruition again this weekend. So my prediction is actually going to be Winn by decision, which is sitting at plus 290, but I'm going to wait for this line. I'm fully okay with passing on him at that plus 145, plus 150 range, but you're forcing my hand if it gets to plus 200. We'll have to take the shot if that's the case, but even as a straight up prediction, I'll go Winn via decision. Next up, we got Jake Matthews returning after his big win over Andre Fialho a couple months back. He comes in as a minus 255 favorite. He's going up against Matt Semelsberger, who comes in at plus 215. Now, again, this is a fight where there's recency bias and a possible market overcorrection on the Jake Matthews side. We saw the recency bias in play in his last fight against Andre Fialho, where Fialho was the favorite in that fight. Mystified me, just completely baffled me that Jake Matthews, a guy who had years of UFC experience under his belt, was the underdog to a guy who had just knocked out a couple bums, if I'm being honest. But Jake Matthews goes out there, shows up and shows out, cashes that second round KO ticket, cashes his underdog ticket, and I believe that was the second ever time I've had an underdog as my lock of the night play. That's how confident I was in him. But now, flip it forward here against Matt Semelsberger at minus 255. I don't want much to do with this line. Sure, Matthews could be improving. Sure, his striking could be getting better, and he might even knock out Matt Semelsberger himself. But his bread and butter is that grappling, and Semelsberger might end up being competitive in that realm, especially with how big he is and how towering he could be. A lot of the success from the Semelsberger side throughout his career has come from his athleticism, from his physique, his big, intimidating stature. He has some solid power in his hands, as we've seen him knock out Jason Witt and Martin Sano in mere seconds. But when fights are stretched on, that's where things start to get iffy. But we saw some good things from him in that AJ Fletcher fight where he got taken down in that first round, lost that first round, and then mustered up the energy and the motivation to go out there and win the second and third round with the better strikes, landing more damage, stuffing a couple takedowns, and winning that fight. Good look for him. A lot of people kind of down on Semelsberger after losing a fight to Alex Morono. A lot of people expected him to win. But I think Morono's performance this past weekend against Santiago Ponzinibbio might cement why that was not as bad of a loss for Semelsberger as most people believed before this past weekend. Morono is just such a tough style to deal with. And when his durability is on point, he can march you down, drown you in volume and output, and maybe even knock you out. But we saw Semelsberger succumb to that pace and pressure of Morono, which is why he ended up losing his last fight. But here I could see him kind of being competitive with Matthews at times. I think Matthews is the side. I think he's going to win this fight, but I want nothing to do with that minus 255. I'm looking to see what the over 2.5 is whenever that ends up dropping, because if it's around that minus 120, minus 130 range, I think it has some solid value as well. I think we'll see Matthews go back to his roots, which is the grappling. I think he looks to get this fight to the ground, grind out Semelsberger, and I think Semelsberger has a good enough submission defense and grappling defense that he can stay in this fight for the majority of 15 minutes. So pick is Matthews. I think he's the better overall fighter, much more experienced against higher level of talent, but the line is just a little bit too wide. Semelsberger could absolutely be making improvements that he could exploit Jake Matthews here. So don't tie yourself to that big chalk. Maybe Matthews via decision, plus 100, a better spot, but yeah, I'll likely be staying away from this fight as a whole. All right, next up, we got Cheyenne Vlismas coming in at minus 195. She's going up against Corey McKenna, who comes in at plus 165. Now, Vlismas, it's been a year since she's been off. In her last fight, she absolutely torched Mallory Martin. I think she landed upwards of 120 significant strikes, stuffing takedowns, and then getting back out into distance, throwing her strikes in combinations, moving the cage very well. And even though it looked like she was on her back foot for the majority of that fight, she stayed consistent with crashing the pocket when she needed to, getting her strikes off, and then getting out of range before she ate any counters. And I think that's a similar style to what we're going to see this weekend against Corey McKenna. I think McKenna will be a little bit more determined to try to get this fight to the ground to keep Cheyenne static. You want to keep her still. That's how you're going to be able to get the best work and opportunity to beat a girl like or a woman like Cheyenne. But I think Cheyenne has way more potential than McKenna. Right, I think that she's the better striker. I think she has a solid enough grappling game to deal with anything that McKenna will throw at her. And then her takedown defense has been solid. You know what I mean? Outside of that Montserrat Ruiz fight where she kept getting taken down with the head and arm choke, I'm sure she's drilled that over and over now so she doesn't get caught in a similar situation from that. But I don't want to read too much into that fight. I think that was more of an anomaly than anything, right? How often do we ever see fighters get stuck in positions like that? That Ruiz chick just seemed to have that position down, and she was able to get the win that night. But I still think that there is a ton of potential on the Vlismas side, and she's kind of just disappeared and went off the grid the last year or so during that whole, JP Bays thing that she was going through, the divorce and separation and all that. She went over to Georgia, and it's no secret anymore. She's, I believe she's with Roman Dolidze, but she's been training over there the last couple of weeks. She's came back to her home gym of Extreme Couture and getting in some high-level training with her fellow training partners. I think she's more than ready for this matchup against McKenna, where I really think she's the better fighter. The only thing that is keeping me from making Vlismas a lock of the night play, similar to Danny Silva from LFA last week, was I need more valuable and relevant footage and data on Vlismas dealing with the takedown heavy approach, with a fighter actually getting her to the ground, not from a head and arm position or head and arm throw position, but just from a conventional takedown, and her urgency in terms of working back to her feet. I believe she does have it, and I believe she will get back to her feet, as I'm not the most impressed with McKenna's ability to control fighters on the ground, but I need to see it before I put 5 units on a fighter. I need to see all my bases covered before I go lock of the night deep on anything. I do think that Vlismas is the side here, and I do think the chalk is worth it, maybe for 2 units, max 3 units, right? I think she'll be the better striker here. And even though McKenna might get some control time up against the cage, maybe a takedown or two, I think the more valuable damage and more scoring criteria will be in the favor of Vlismas, with her landing more significant strikes, more damaging shots, and making it look good for the judges. So I'm going to go Vlismas via decision. And I think this is just her continuing the streak that she's going to be on and marching forward to that top 10 of this division. All right, next up, we got Michal Oleksiejczuk coming in at minus 275. Cody Brundage coming in at plus 230. This is a very interesting fight to me, and a fight that kind of has me scratching my head as to why Brundage is such a big underdog. We've seen the issues Michal Oleksiejczuk has with guys that have been able to grapple him, get him to the mat, and then slice through him like butter. Cody Brundage, coming from a wrestling background, you would expect for him to be chasing the takedowns here. And even though he was not able to complete them against Trishan Gore, still went out there and got the knockout victory. But I think we'll see him have a little bit more success here against Oleksiejczuk and getting this fight to the ground and then smashing him from on top. Plus 230 is way too wide of a line in my opinion. Yes, I'm a big Michal Oleksiejczuk fan myself. I love his style. Herky-jerky, stays in your face, doesn't let you breathe. I've never seen a fighter gas more quickly than Shamil Gamzatov back at UFC 267, I believe it was off the top of my head. Michal stayed in his face, shocked off a couple of takedowns, dug to the body, and eventually finished Gamzatov 3 or 4 minutes into that first round. He could absolutely do that here to Cody Brundage, but just given Brundage's wrestling background alone, I think that's enough to warrant a shot here at plus 230. If he gets this fight to the ground, anytime you've seen a Michal Oleksiejczuk fight, he defends them well. He gets back to his feet pretty quickly. I think Jimmy Crute landed 8 takedowns on him in 3.5 minutes, but it was that 8th takedown that finally got Michal to settle on his back, and that's where we saw Jimmy Crute immediately pass guard, get to full mount, get those positions he needed, and then eventually get that finish the way that he did as well. He is very, very live to end up doing that again here. And I'm talking about Michal settling on his back. Cody Brundage is a big, brooding guy who's very physically intimidating. And I think he can land those takedowns, drag this fight to the ground, and end up getting his hand raised in that aspect. I hear Alfred barking on in the background, and if that's not a sign for me to take the shot on the underdog, I'm going to have to take the shot anyways. I do think it will be a tough task for him to get Oleksiejczuk to the ground, but at plus 230, you're giving me more than enough reasons to take the shot on him here to do that. I like Oleksiejczuk, and I hope he wins. Just the fan in me hope he does. But I think that Brundage has all the tools to be a live underdog here and cash that ticket. So give me Brundage, plus 230, hopefully by ground and pound. Let's get it done. Next up, we got Drew Dober taking on Bobby King Green. Minus 150 on Dober and plus 130 on the returning Bobby Green. Now, last time we saw Bobby Green in the cage, it was a short notice spot against Islam Makhachev back in February, and he ended up fumbling the bag that night and didn't get the win. But we know that he's still capable to go out there and do Bobby Green shit, and that's put pressure on you, throw solid strikes, combinations, output volume, all that good stuff that's absolutely in play here against Drew Dober. Dober's on a solid 2-fight winning streak of his own, finishing his last 2 opponents, Terrence McKenna, and then obviously followed that up with a great performance against Rafael Alves. But both those guys were sitting ducks after that the first couple exchanges between the fighters. Obviously, Alves, we know a lot of his success comes in the early going of fights. If he's not able to get you out of there early, he likely falls off and his opponents are able to finish him. That's what Drew Dober was able to do. Dober's a great all-around fighter. I'd say his strength is his striking, but he's not going to have target practice here against Bobby Green, who likely not likely. He has, I believe, a 62% striking defense rate, moves well with shots, rolls with shots well, and counters effectively too. I think he is the cleaner boxer, the more technical striker. And as he starts to touch up Drew Dober, I think we'll see the confidence in Dober start to fall and Bobby Green start to take over. Bobby is always in close fights. He is always live, very durable, very tough to put away. And I think that Dober is going to get more and more frustrated as he gets touched up by Bobby Green here. My one holdup and my one concern, Bobby Green coming off a USADA suspension, right? Nobody saw that coming when the news first dropped, just because we know what kind of guy he is. But I wonder what kind of impact that might have on his performance. I don't think he was on this guy that was like on all the gear, Liver King style or anything like that. But I think that it might impact him at this point of his career. So I'm waiting to see where this line goes. Plus 130 is a good enough line for Bobby Green, even if you want to take the shot at this point. But I think that there might be some Drew Dober love coming in, given the current run that he's on, given the finishes that he's had. And if we can get Bobby Green closer to that plus 150, I think we have a larger edge on the odds there. And I think it'll be worth a shot at that point. But he'll still be my pick here. I'm going to go Bobby Green, and I think he outworks Drew Dober here. The over, not too bad of a spot either, in my opinion. I do think this fight goes the full 15 minutes, as do most Bobby Green fights, and this fight will be no exception. So give me Green by decision, possible dog play incoming there as well. Next up, let's get to Bruce Leroy Caceres coming in at plus 140, and Julian Erosa coming in at minus 165. Both these guys are kind of in the same category to me in the fact that they are veterans of the game, And they're always a wild card in their fight. We don't know if we're going to get the best version of them, the worst version of them, or the version of them where they test a much better opponent and they might come up short against them, but they still give a good enough account of themselves. Now they're going up against each other, right? They're both coming off of their last, Caceres coming off a loss to Sodiq Yusuff, but the fight before that, an upset victory over Sungwoo Choi. He was a plus 225 underdog that night, and Choi did have some success on the feet, but we ultimately saw Caceres get his back, choke him out, cash that plus 225 ticket for anybody that took the shot there. Julian Erosa, near plus 200 underdog against Hakeem Dawodu last time around, and he went out there and outstruck Dawodu, something that's been very hard to do against a guy like that, but the veteran experience, the striking awkwardness of Julian Erosa pays off for him that night. This is a fight where I can't really get to a side. You know what I mean? I do lean Erosa. I do think he'll be the one that ends up landing the more significant strikes here, and I think he'll be making it look better for the judges. But I do think that we're going to see all aspects in the MMA game here, from the striking to the grappling to the clinching, and I think both guys are going to be relatively competitive with each other in those spots. So I can't get to a side. You know what I mean? I don't see much value on the Caceres side, nor do I see much on the Erosa side at minus 165. Where I do see some potential value, though, is the over 2.5, which currently sits at minus 155. I do think a large part of this fight will be nullified with both these guys landing similar amount of strikes, you know, being safe in the grappling realm for both guys. And I think we see this spill into a judge's scorecards. I do lean Erosa, like I said. I think he'll land the more damaging blows, but I think the over 2.5 is probably the best way to go about this fight. You know, you see these guys getting finishes or getting finished against them getting finished by higher level of competition or them finishing much lower level of competition. But now that they're fighting kind of like the same level, I think we'll see them nullify each other and see this fight likely go the full 50 minutes, hopefully even 12 and a half minutes, so that we can cash that over 2.5. It is going to be a sweat, especially the way that Julian Erosa fights and sometimes with his striking defense, which could be poor at times. But I don't think that Caceres has that crazy knockout power to do that. I think Caceres has a good enough chin to deal with any of the big strikes coming from the Erosa side. And I think we see this fight get to that 12 and a half minute mark to cash the over 2.5 for us. But I'll go with Erosa via decision as my official prediction for this matchup. All right, next up, we got Amir Albazi coming in as a minus 435 favorite. He's going up against recent, well, I guess it wasn't the ultimate, contender series signing, because he didn't get signed that first night as it was an abysmal night. But Alessandro Costa gets the call up on short notice here against Amir Albazi. He comes in at plus 350. So I think there are still some question marks about Costa. I'm not fully sold that this guy's a tomato can, nor am I sold that he's this, hidden gem, this rose coming out of concrete or anything like that. I don't think that that's what he is. I think he's a good all-around fighter. His striking is decent. He throws with power. He has some good kicks. His best work is done when he's able to get fights into the jiu-jitsu realm, especially when he's able to get your back. He threatens well enough to get some rear naked chokes, but he also threatens enough to keep you on the defensive and control you and end off a round on your back, essentially. Albazi is a much better overall fighter, though. His wrestling will allow him to kind of dictate where this fight goes, and his striking is improving, and I think it will kind of cancel out any of the power that Costa is going to be throwing his way. Albazi is able to finish a lot of his opponents on the regional scene, but as you see him fight, the Zhalgas Zhumagulovs of the world and the Jose Torreses of the world, that's where you see fights get stretched into that, decision mark, that third round, going to the judges' scorecards. Costa, same thing, right? Like, we've seen him go to a decision against a couple guys. We've seen him finish guys in mere seconds. But I think that we'll see this be somewhat competitive early, which will cause this fight to go into the second round, which will cause it to possibly go to the third round. And I think that Albazi wins. I think he controls this fight no matter where it goes. And even after having a bad start against Zhumagulov, we've seen him bounce back from adversity early in fights and still go on to win rounds 2 and 3. Here against Costa, I don't know how much adversity he'll actually face, but I do think it's going to be hard for him to get a guy like Costa out of there, which is why I'm happy they set the total here at 1.5. At over 1.5, I think this is a solid spot for Albazi to go out there and grind out Costa and help us cash that 7.5 minute ticket. It's currently sitting around minus 180, and even being at 1.5, that's not normal to see for a flyweight fight. Flyweight fights are normally set at 2.5, and you usually see a lot of chalk on the over. So to get minus 180 at 1.5 here, I think is a bit of a steal. I think many people are expecting Albazi to just go out there and run over him, similar to what he did against Malcolm Gordon and similar to what he did against Francisco Figueiredo. But I think Costa is a little bit more defensively sound than those guys, and I think we'll see him actually put up a bit of a fight early in this matchup. So Albazi is the pick. I'm not going to get crazy and parlay him with everything here, but I do think he wins, so he'll be in a couple of degenerate parlays, don't get me wrong. But I think the play here is the over 1.5. I think if Albazi does get the win, it likely comes later on in this matchup. So give me the over 1.5, minus 180. I think that's a great line, but I do think Albazi continues his ascent up this flyweight division, gets this, it's just a random win, especially considering that it's a short notice spot. It's a reason for him to stay busy. It's a reason for him to go out there, cash another paycheck, get another dub. But I can't wait to see him fight the top of this division, right? I think he was supposed to fight Brandon Royval and even Jeff Molina at certain times, but those fights ended up falling through for various reasons. But hopefully he can get the win here, and hopefully it comes over that 1.5 round mark. All right, let's get to this next matchup, co-main event, the fight that I am most excited about on this card. We got Arman Tsarukyan coming in at minus 190 and Damir Ismagulov coming in at plus 160. This is a firefight. This should be the main event. They should give us 5 rounds of this fight because we're going to need all of it to determine who really comes out the winner. Now, Tsarukyan is a guy who's been in the UFC, fought some high-level competition, been a little bit more active than Ismagulov as well, who's been dealing with inactivity over the last 2 years or so. Tsarukyan coming up short in his last fight, which was a main event in June against Mateusz Gamrot, and a lot of people scored that fight for him, but it was a close fight. And we saw a lot of things in that fight that will likely pertain to this fight, and which is why I kind of like the underdog. Tsarukyan is a great wrestler, great scrambler, and is always in fights when he can get that going, and his striking is still improving. A lot of it comes from kicks from the outside or a lot of big winging shots to try to intimidate his opponent, but the end goal is to drag you to the mat and grind you through the mat and likely win that fight or likely win his fights by decision. On the flip side for Damir Ismagulov, a much more polished striker. He is very educated with his lead hand, uses his jab consistently, follows up with the 2 right behind it, and he just keeps you busy by just pattering you in the face over and over again. We saw Groom Kutiteladze's face look like a strawberry cheesecake in that second round as Damir kept touching him up and kept just peppering him with shots. He was stopping the takedowns, which is a great positive for him, especially in this matchup against Tsarukyan, where I think that his takedown defense, his own ability to scramble, and his own ability to stay out of bad positions will allow him to maximize his opportunity in the realm that he is strongest at, especially in this matchup, which is the striking. So I think we'll see him stuff the takedowns, and there might be some control time on the Tsarukyan side, but once these guys are at distance on the feet, I think we'll see that jab of Ismagulov work wonders. Even the kicking game from the outside will allow him to keep Tsarukyan at bay, and as he stuffs more takedowns, as he continues to get back up, that's going to deflate Tsarukyan in my opinion, and I think we'll see Ismagulov pepper his way to a decision victory. So I think he is a great underdog at plus 160. I think this is a phenomenal line. I think he was an even wider underdog, a couple weeks ago when this line initially dropped. Shout out to anybody that got Ismagulov around plus 220, but he may end up looking like the underdog of the night. Considering his skill set, we never get it at plus money. He's consistently a minus 500 favorite against most of his opponents. Now we're getting him at plus 160 in a very favorable matchup for him, considering he has a legit advantage in the striking and good enough defensive grappling to keep this fight in that realm, the striking realm. So give me Ismagulov by decision. Tsarukyan will be back. I promise you that. But right now, I think Ismagulov is the one who gets closer to that eventual title shot that I think he's going to get. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but if he stays active enough and continues to pile up these wins, it's going to be hard to deny this 24-1 fighter, hopefully 25-1 come Saturday night. All right, main event time, folks. And this fight takes place in the middleweight division between Jared Cannonier and Sean Strickland. Before I get into it, though, make sure you guys hit that like, hit that subscribe if you haven't already, drop a comment below, and shit on me for all the underdogs that I'm taking on this card, but I think there's going to be a lot of dogs barking to close out this year. If you want access to the CFFC and Fury FC fights breakdowns that are happening this weekend as well, check out the Patreon. That's where you're going to be able to get all of my breakdowns. I'll do main event breakdowns for the YouTube for those events, but for the full card, it will strictly be on the Patreon, link in the description below, not to mention all the picks for this UFC card as well. All right, let's get back to this main event here. Like I said, pretty much a pick'em fight. You know, the bookie that I have currently has Sean Strickland at -115, Jared Cannonier at -105. I think a lot of people, and I'm kind of surprised that it hasn't really hit the betting line as of yet, but I think it is the reason the line is a pick'em line is because a lot of people believe that the durability of Sean Strickland is compromised after he got knocked out by Alex Caceres back in July, I believe it was. But there's a big difference between Jared Cannonier and Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira, first and foremost, huge fighter. You know, a lot of the defensive striking from Sean Strickland is based on him rolling with shots, staying outside, leaning back, eating a little bit of the punch, but, you know, his durability usually holding up. That's not going to happen against a guy like Alex Pereira, who had the reach and height advantage the way that he did, and not to mention the world-class striking advantage that he had over Sean Strickland that night. Of course, that straight down the middle is going to land on him, and he's going to be able to knock out Sean Strickland. Of course, Jared Cannonier, he's going to be the typical middleweight that Sean Strickland has fought. A guy that needs that explosive, crashing pocket style to try to knock you out. Yes, he can knock out a Jack Hermansson who fails takedown after takedown and then leaves himself vulnerable to getting crashed forward and bombed on. Of course, he's going to knock out Derek Brunson, who we know has chin issues and has cardio issues of his own. Almost got Jared Cannonier out there himself, but was able to, ended up fumbling the bag, and we saw Cannonier knock him out in that second round. But Sean Strickland, some people might say he's defensively irresponsible, but he's been making it work for himself. He's eaten some big shots from past opponents and continue to stick to his game plan and come out victorious. He can do the same thing here against Jared Cannonier. The volume, the output, the consistency of staying in your face and putting that jab in your face is going to frustrate Cannonier, and that's going to cause him to overextend, to overthrow, and I think that's going to just be bad news for him, where we see Strickland continuously just pepper him, and stay in front of his face, get the numbers on him, get the volume on him, and get his hand raised that way. So I don't need to really go into a super in-depth breakdown on this fight because I really think it's kind of black and white. We're going to get the big power aggressive shots from Jared Cannonier, maybe even some leg kicks in there, but I think that for the most part, Sean Strickland will march him down, stay in his face, out-volume him, outpoint him, keep this fight upright, and win this fight via decision. I think -115, a little bit of a recency bias spot here, right? If Pereira had just beaten Strickland by decision or something like that, I think that will see Strickland maybe closer to -150 in this spot. But a lot of people believe he's going to be compromised from that fight. I don't think so. I think it'll be fine and good to go, and we're going to get a classic Sean Strickland performance this weekend. So let's go Sean Strickland by decision. There you guys go. The final UFC breakdown for 2022. Hopefully you guys enjoy the show. Hopefully a large majority of these underdogs end up cashing, because if they do, your boy is going to have himself a night. I appreciate everybody for checking out the show as always. Make sure you hit that like, hit that subscribe, drop a comment below. And if you want that CFFC and Fury FC coverage, that Cage Warriors coverage at the end of the year as well, Patreon, link in the description below. 350 more than satisfied customers at this point in time for a simple price as well. I think you guys will very much enjoy that as well. All right. Love you guys. Appreciate you guys. And I don't know why Alfred's losing his shit in the background right now. Is what it is. Love that guy. Love you guys as well. Good luck on your bets this weekend. And I'll see you guys as always throughout the week. Peace.